Some people consider 3 a.m. to be the spirit's time to communicate with us. Others think it's the devil's mark. Some even think that when you wake up at this time, someone is watching you. But if someone were to be watching you, how would they watch if there were no windows or doors in the room you were in? There are many superstitions for what 3 a.m. could be. I'm going to tell you the real meaning of this worldwide time myth. While you sleep soundly, you dream. While you dream, you are unaware of your surroundings. Unaware of what could be lurking in the closet, under your bed, besides you in your covers. Your eyes flutter open and you check the time on either your watch, cell phone, alarm clock, or simply whatever you have lying around that has time displayed on it. But knowing the time doesn't really matter, right? You rub your eyes and blink a few times, adjusting to the darkness of your room. You hear the sounds of floorboards creaking, the sound of pitter-patter along the ground. I'm sure it's just a mouse, you think to yourself. Maybe it's just a mouse, or a large rat. A very large rat indeed to be making such loud footsteps. You dare not look over the edge of your bed, for you are paralyzed in your fear. You're just scaring yourself. Enough already with this foolishness, you tell yourself. But is it foolishness? Or is there reason to be scared? Are there monsters under the bed, waiting to snatch your feet and pull you under the bed when you get up in the middle of the night to use the restroom or get a drink of water? You do not believe in monsters. Those were stories that your mother or father told you years ago as a child. The boogeyman, Sandman, and other monster stories that were just stories to give you a spook, right? Yeah, right? Monsters aren't real. You think and chuckle at your childish fears. But wait, what was that? That pitter-patter of feet seemed to be getting closer. You squeeze your eyes tightly shut as you hear that long, loud screech of your door creaking ever so slowly. Was that a giggle you just heard? No, of course not. Mice don't giggle. Neither do rats. You're being delusional. You open your eyes slowly and stare at your ceiling. There is movement under your covers, the covers that you stay under to provide you warmth and comfort. It's moving towards you slowly in a crooked fashion. It looks as if it's limping beneath the blankets. You are frozen in terror, afraid to move, or else you might just give away your location. You feel something tugging at the loose clothes that you wear. Oh Jesus, what was that? You yank away the covers and throw them away to the ground and gasp at what you see. The creature is lopsided, grotesque in a way that makes your stomach turn in knots. It wears torn fabric and looks hundreds of years old. It tilts its head to the right and gives you a crooked smile. Its dark eyes without pupils stare at you, unblinking. You slowly begin to push yourself into a sitting position, backing away from the creature. This doesn't seem to bother it though. It simply limps closer and closer to you until it has reached your leg. It pulls itself onto you and begins to crawl, slowly, oh so slowly. It bears that crooked, toothy grin. Its grey skin hangs from its bony body. It smells horrid, a smell you've not come to face before. But you know this smell, even without having smelled it before. It's the smell of rot, but not like any rot. The stingy scent of rot, flesh and blood. What are you going to do? You think and lick your lips, eyes wide, not removing them from the creature. It's still inching its way up to your body, coming closer and closer to your face with each limping step. You take in a deep breath through your nose and then release a scream so loud you think you've popped your own eardrums. The creature suddenly jerks its head towards the door and lets out a murderous cry. It quickly limps to the edge of the bed and jumps, landing to the floor with a thump. It rushes out the door and disappears into the dark of the hallway. You see, 3 in the morning is when the little things come out to play. When the little things decide it's your lucky day. When the little things show themselves. But don't let this deceive you. The first time you see them is almost certainly the last. You are lucky if you can get away safely. I cannot tell you how to deal with the little things, for they are everywhere. In every home, every hole, nook and cranny your house has. How many you have in your home is not a question answered easily. All I can tell you is that there are many. They study you, and they plan your demise. No wonder they reek of death. I'm not a dog person. This hasn't always been the case though. As a matter of fact, I used to love them. I grew up telling everyone I would be a veterinarian one day. Had that been the case, I like to think that I wouldn't be in the position I'm in now. I'm a nervous wreck. As long as I can remember, I've suffered from constant paranoia. If you asked my parents, they'd tell you an entirely different story. According to them, I was calm, cool and collected as a child. They say it wasn't until I was around 12 when the way I carried myself drastically changed. I don't remember much from back then. However, there was a particular scene from my childhood that I'll never be able to push out of my mind. Something, or rather someone, that has shadowed me for the rest of my life. January 1st, 1994. Remember how I said I wasn't a dog person? Well, there's a reason for that. As I said, I told my parents that I wanted to be a veterinarian. They supported me. They wanted me to be successful. I take for granted how much they cared for me. They bought me books on animal anatomy. They took me to zoos. They bought me various VHS documentaries on animals. They tried their best to raise me into the adult I wanted to be. The adult that my parents could be proud of. My birthday was in November. I was turning 12. My previous attempts of asking my parents for a pet had always ended in an uneventful manner. They would always say I wasn't old enough, that I wasn't prepared for the responsibility of looking after a living, breathing animal. I was set to prove them wrong. This year, I was 12. I'd been reading up on all of those animal books, and this year I knew I was ready. Once again, I told my parents that I wanted an animal this year. Their reaction was different this time. My father gave me a single maybe. And with that, I knew what I'd be getting for my birthday this year. It was no surprise when I woke up the day of my birthday to a small puppy licking my face. I was thrilled. There, my parents were standing at my bedroom door, smiling warmly. They wished me a happy birthday and gave me a speech about how I needed to treat the dog the way I would any other living being. They provided me with dog food, bowls and a leash. In that moment, I was the happiest I'd ever been in my life. That dog was my best friend. The time I spent with the dog was great. I was an only child, homeschooled. I was never really able to have interaction with people my age. Not that I'd have a problem with doing so. My dog, who I named Theo, had steadily grown a bond with me over the course of a month. We bonded the way any other kid would with his dog. We went on walks, we played together, I bathed him, fed him, and overall trying to raise him the best I could, as my parents had done for me. Needless to say, my parents were impressed. Their opinion of me soon changed. It was January 1st, the beginning of a new year, and a new beginning for me. I woke up at around 10 a.m, a late start for me. I never actually made it to midnight on New Year's before. I felt like absolute crap. I was greeted in the kitchen by my mother, who had provided a delicious breakfast. My mother's cooking was the stuff of legend. As I sat at the dining room table to eat breakfast, Theo greeted me from under the table and sat down at my feet. I slipped him a piece of bacon. He was delighted. My breakfast was cut short. One of my chores was to get the mail every day. As soon as I heard the familiar sound of the mail truck, I shot up out of my chair. One of my animal documentaries taught me about Ivan Pavlov and his dog. Funny how I didn't know I was being conditioned to react a certain way to the sound of that truck. I was still tired from last night. I fumbled toward the front door. I wasn't paying much attention. As soon as I opened the door, Theo took off as fast as he could. I couldn't process what just happened. He'd never done that before. I collected my thoughts and decided to go after him. I grabbed my jacket from the coat rack and ran outside. As soon as I stepped foot on my porch, I froze. Theo hadn't gotten far. He hadn't even left the front yard. The yard's exit was blocked by a man. This was the first time I saw him. The man looked straight at me. He didn't blink. I didn't know what to do or how to feel. At first, I was grateful. He was the only thing standing between Theo and the rest of the world. He said nothing. Theo was looking up at him. He wagged his tail. He panted. It was as if the man didn't notice the dog was there. He just kept staring. I wanted to say something. I wanted to thank him. The way he was looking at me was as if he was expecting me to say something. I couldn't bring myself to. Without averting his gaze, he kneeled down and picked up Theo by the scruff of his neck. Theo whined. I wanted to tell him to put my dog down, but again, I couldn't. I simply couldn't think of appropriate words. My mind was all in a jumble. I couldn't move, and I couldn't think straight. All I could do was watch. The man reached into his pocket, pulled out a knife, and cut the dog's throat in one quick motion. Blood spilled onto the snow-covered ground. He held the dog in the air for a few seconds, letting Theo's blood form a puddle underneath him. The man then simply let go. Theo fell with a light crunch onto the reddened snow. Again, the man's gaze did not leave mine. He dropped the knife to the ground and merely walked away. It wasn't until he was completely out of sight when I could move again. I made my way over to Theo's garbling corpse. I stood over him. I wanted to cry, but couldn't shed a single tear. My mother emerged from the house, surely wondering why getting the mail was taking so long. I don't blame her for screaming. She saw me standing over the mangled corpse of Theo, knife on the ground. It didn't take a genius to put two and two together. The scene described itself. Aftermath of the first occurrence. Germany. This man. In the following months, my parents had forced me into seeing a psychiatrist. When asked why I killed Theo, I tried to tell him that it wasn't me. I tried my best to tell him about the man. I could tell he wasn't buying it. "All right," said the therapist in a smug tone. "Tell me what this man looked like." That's when I realized I couldn't describe him. It's not that I didn't remember his face. It's just, he was so generic, I wouldn't be able to describe him without describing millions of other people in the world. His face was so forgettable. I know I stared at the man for a good 5 minutes. One would assume I would be able to remember the face of the man who had killed my dog without breaking eye contact with me. It was like I knew what he looked like, but my brain couldn't translate his appearance into words. I didn't answer the therapist's question. I simply slumped into my chair. Throughout my life, this man has popped up in multiple occasions. I may go into further detail in the future, but all I can say for now is that he definitely exists. I may seem crazy, but I know what I saw that day. I always see him, whether he's among a crowd while watching the news or in my dreams. He's real, and he's always watching. Think back to when you were a child. You probably had some silly thing that you were afraid of, some ridiculous, imaginary boogeyman that haunted your nightmares when you were little. But you grew out of it, and soon enough, you didn't need the nightlight to chase away the monsters anymore. Except sometimes, that boogeyman isn't entirely imaginary. I know mine wasn't. It all started when I was about 4 or 5. My parents and I lived in this dingy little house in a small town, and I didn't really have many friends in the area. So, naturally, I spent most of my free time exploring my house and playing little make-believe games all by myself. There was one part of the house I refused to go in though. The basement. For whatever reason, I was convinced that there was some thing living down there, and that it would get me if I went down there. I wasn't as wrong as you'd think. Before I go any further though, I should say that I was a bit of a coward as a kid, so nightmares were a fairly regular occurrence. But most of the time, I could tell that I was dreaming, so I didn't make much of them. These dreams that I'm going to tell you about were different though. They felt absolutely real, and given what happened, they very well might have been. Like I said, I was just a little tyke when I first started dreaming about the old man. I still remember every little detail, even today. Especially today, in fact, but I digress. I remember in the dream, it was a beautiful summer day, and I was out and about, riding my bike in the driveway, and generally not having a care in the world. My parents were sitting at the top of the steps, watching me, and as far as I cared, everything was perfect as can be. Suddenly, I felt an icy wind blow me over, and my bike just sort of locked up. I began rolling slowly backwards along the driveway, and, unable to slow the bike down or even dismount it, I began looking around in a panic, trying to see what was going on. And it was then that I saw the old man for the first time. He was dressed sharply, rather like an old-fashioned undertaker. the implications of which escaped me at the time. He was tall and gaunt, seeming to be nothing more than skin and bones, in a disturbingly literal sense, and his pale, sunken face, with its grim scowl and hooked nose lending it an odd vulture-like quality, was framed by a thinning mane of wiry grey hair. But his eyes were by far the worst thing about him. At the age of 5, I was unable to articulate exactly what I saw when I looked into the cold, dead eyes of what we came to call the Dream Man. Even as a grown man, I still can't. What I saw was simply too alien, too inhuman, too utterly incomprehensible for any man to put into words. I didn't waste any time as soon as I saw that horrible thing. I tried to run, but I still couldn't even get off of my bike. I turned to scream for my parents, only to find that they were no longer there. Not that they could have done anything anyway, as the old man was upon me, with his wild hair and horrible, horrible eyes. I felt a freezing numbness as his long, bony fingers grasped my arm, his dirty, claw-like nails digging into my flesh. I remember how the old man leaned in close, his cracked, virtually non-existent lips parted to reveal rotting, crooked teeth. And I remember the one word he whispered to me as he held me in his grasp. Cellar. The next thing I knew, I was being shaken awake by my parents, as I had actually been screaming in my sleep. I told them about what had happened, and they told me it was just a nightmare, and I believed them. Every so often, I would have nightmares about the man, but since they were only dreams, my parents didn't think much of them. That is, until I started sleepwalking. As bad as my first encounter with this somnambulant wraith was, the worst had yet to come. The dream was always the same, with extremely slight variations. It always started off with me in my room playing, when I would suddenly get a sense of wrongness about my surroundings. I would go off to find my parents, but no matter where I looked, I couldn't find them. When I would go to the pantry, where the door to the basement was, I would hear someone calling me, and I would turn to see a door that shouldn't have been there. As I took a step towards it, the door would swing open, and there would be the old man, beckoning me, his teeth bared in a malicious sneer. I could do nothing but march towards him, screaming silently in my mind as my limbs jerkily dragged me along against my will. Usually, it was this point I would be woken up by my parents. Somehow, I would sleepwalk all the way to the cellar door and begin to head downstairs. Usually, they caught me before I started going down the stairs. In fact, they almost always did, but not always. Once, the old man managed to get me down to the basement. That's the only nightmare about the Dream Man that I don't entirely remember. I just remember that I was in the basement with him, and he gripped my leg in his icy, dead grip, a vile grin splitting his face. All I remember after that is excruciating pain before I woke up and continued to be in agony. Apparently while sleepwalking, I tumbled down the stairs into the basement, breaking my leg in the process. There were still scratches on my leg from where his filthy, cracked nails had dug into the flesh, but my parents were convinced that the cat must have clawed me as I slept. After I got out of the hospital, my parents took me to see a psychologist who claimed that the nightmares and sleepwalking were likely stress-induced, stating that my parents' constant arguing was probably to blame. but just in case, I was prescribed a medication to help me sleep. Naturally, after what happened, sleep was the last thing I wanted to do, and being a stupid little kid, I tried to stay awake forever. Obviously, this didn't work, but strangely enough, the nightmares sort of subsided. I mean, sure, the old man would regularly show up in my dreams, terrifying me into consciousness, but he never forced me down to the basement again. So time passed, like it tends to do, and in the blink of an eye, I was in 3rd grade and had even managed to make a friend, Mike. Mike and I were more like brothers than anything else. We were two of a kind, and we were inseparable. Of course, as alike as we were, we had one major difference. Mike was completely fearless, whereas I was absolutely terrified of 2 specific things: the Dream Man and the basement I had come to associate with him, if that thing even counts as a him. One day, our parents relented and allowed Mike to spend the weekend with us. Oh, we had loads of fun. We played video games, we told spooky stories, and we snuck into my dad's secret horror movie stash. But eventually, after all the spooky stuff we had seen and done, Mike suggested that we up the ante. We were going to go down to the basement to confront my fears. I begged Mike. I pleaded him not to make me go down there, but he saw it as his duty as my best friend to break me out of my fear. And when Mike got an idea in his head, there was no dissuading him of it. How I wish what happened next had only been a nightmare. So just after midnight, as Saturday became Sunday, we crept down the stairs into the basement, armed with flashlights, and in my case, a wiffle bat. We spent about half an hour down there, looking in every corner for the aged ghoul who had haunted my dreams for so long, with no success. Eventually, we gave up and headed back upstairs. That's when everything went to hell. Standing there, in the doorway, was the old man, every bit as horrifying as he had been in my dreams. In one swift motion, he clamped his bony, gnarled hands around my shoulders, and with a strength belying his withered frame, lifted me up to his face so those nightmarish eyes of his filled my vision. I heard one of us scream, and I didn't know if it was me or Mike that was screaming. I don't remember what happened after that, as the next thing I knew, I was coming to on the cold, hard floor, and Mike was huddled in the corner, shuddering, wide-eyed and pale, clutching the bat to his chest. For some time afterwards, I continuously asked him what happened, but he always refused to tell me. As time passed, we grew distant, as friends often do, and as Mike became more and more withdrawn, I always blamed myself. Whatever had happened to us in that basement had changed him, and it was all my fault. Eventually, I stopped dreaming about the old man, and I managed to put the whole ordeal behind me. I went to college, met a great girl. We've been married for 10 years now, and everything is pretty great. Like I said, I had managed to move on, and had almost managed to forget about the Dream Man. Until this morning, that is. At breakfast, my son told my wife and I about a bad dream he'd had last night. A dream about an old man in the basement. An old man with cold hands and terrifying eyes.